Hold on to your butts.
Da-da-da. You were saying?
Welcome to episode 98 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. Tonight, I am joined by Darren, who probably made a better New Year's resolution than I did. My resolution was to do better intros for this podcast, but as you can see, I'm a total train wreck as usual.
Well,
Woo.
another job done. Fantastic job. How are you, Mary? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Another trip around the sun, or as you call it, another trip around the IPA bar. So we're good. How are you? What's going on?
Oh, I'm good. So happy 2023 to you and to all of our listeners as well. It's good to be back recording again. First episode of 2023. It's episode 98.
I know, it's crazy.
We are 2 away from the 100.
Wow, the math skills still astound.
They do.
They really do.
I think I've really improved in the last, we're going into our third year of this. I think I've really improved since that episode 2 when you threw that really hard math problem at me. Math is
you would have thought
math
so.
is hard. Math is hard.
Math is definitely hard. Anyway, so we've had a great night so far. This would do the double duty today. Earlier tonight we had our fantastic book club with the great Terry Alford, the writer who his fantastic book, In the Houses of Their Dead, we talked about. We had a bunch of people on. I hope a lot of people are going to appreciate it and enjoy that, because I'm not going to lie to you, Mary. Love me talking about some Booth and some Lincoln assassination. Not going to lie to you.
It was really, really good. You had really good questions. Our listeners that were on had really great questions too. It was a great group of people. And our next book club meeting is going to be on February the 22nd, 6 o'clock Eastern, via Zoom, and we're going to be talking with Alexander Rose is going to be talking to us and joining us to talk about his book, The Lion and the Fox, which is about spies in Liverpool, England, and the Confederate Navy. So that's pretty.
That's going to be pretty neat. That's going to be pretty neat. He's a Revolutionary War guy. He's a jack of all trades. That book is absolutely fantastic. So he'll be doing double duty for us. We'll be doing our usual episode with him, and then we're going to be doing the book club, to your point. And so people are going to really appreciate. We haven't done a lot of Navy. A lot of people like the Navy.
We've been asked to do Navy stuff pretty much since we started this, and we've always said yes, we're going to do Navy soon. And we've touched on them in a few different episodes, like about Vicksburg, and we touched on them in some episodes last year, but never done a really in-depth look at the Civil War Navy. And it's kind of like the Trans-Mississippi Theater. It kind of gets left behind with everything. I think
it does. And we're going to do a little Navy. We're going to do a little spies, some intrigue, and this is going to be a lot of fun. So we are turning the page. We are moving on to a new year. But since I'm going to wait around all day,
I was just about to ask you, what are you drinking?
Oh, okay, fine. I'm drinking. It is called, what is this called? It's called Secret Bear Hug, which is fantastic. That's exactly what you want to have. It's from Coosa Island, I believe, in Chicago. So I'm drinking it out of my old Canada mug that some knucklehead got me not too long ago. So what about yourself? What are you drinking?
I am drinking Just a Kitten by Exhibit A Brewing, which is from Framingham here in Massachusetts. And I'm drinking it out of my William Sherman. You can't see it because if you put a background on Zoom, you can't see the mug. But it's got Sherman on it, and it says Die Mad on it, because I am going to be talking about Sherman tonight in this episode.
Okay. Well, some things never change, as they say. Well, it's New Year. Everyone has their resolutions, Mary. So we're going to talk a little about that. The month of January that we're in is traditionally one. The gyms are full. The line of the DQs are short. The
DQ is the place that will break your resolution.
It will. Seltzer water has replaced beer this month. A lot of people do dry January. We've been doing a lot of battle stuff lately. So we figured maybe it's kind of fun to take a little bit of a break from that carnage and casualty numbers, those numbers you so love to report, and maybe do something a little more lighthearted. So maybe do some New Year's resolutions of a handful of our Civil War personalities. So, we've said many times now that people are people. Whether they lived in the 19th century or the 21st century. And just like you, Mary, they're all flawed. There's no doubt about that. And so maybe, just maybe, if we had a chance to do a New Year's resolution, maybe some of them might want to change their ways. So we thought we'd have a little fun with this. So we'll talk about a few people. Then we'll kick some ideas around at the end. So
we've got 3 people that we're going to talk about. Really in depth, so probably spend 10, 15 minutes talking about each of them, and then we're just going to kind of have our usual discussion about just some other generals, that some of the resolutions they might have made as well, just to wrap things up at the end.
Whole thing all figured out anyway. So I would say ladies first, but I will start this because I was told to.
Yeah.
These resolutions, some things never change. Pretty much. Okay, well, fine. But first person I want to talk about is a man they call the Tarnished Cavalier, Mary. And this, of course, is the infamous Major General Earl Van Dorn.
Or
And
EVD.
we talked about him and off and on, but we're gonna have some fun with our old EVD here, and talk about a little background and maybe some things that he might have tried to do differently. And I have a good idea what he probably wanted to do differently, but I digress. Earl Van Dorn. He's born on September 17th, 1820, in the town of in Port Gibson, Mississippi. The town famously, U.S. grants that the town was too pretty to burn. That's what he said about it. He was born, his father was a lawyer and a judge named Peter Aaron Van Dorn. His mother was Sophia Donaldson Caffrey. And Dorn, he wanted to prove himself a lot of things. He wanted to show that he was brave. He wanted to show that he was a fantastic horseman. He wanted to do so many things. He was a strong leader of men, and he was never really afraid to put himself in harm's way. He was also the guy, believe it or not, who liked to paint. He liked to write poetry. And by all accounts, he wasn't bad at either. He was a warrior, but he was also a romantic. And this will prove to be his ultimate flaw, not to give away the ending. But this is what we're going to get into here a little bit. In Van Dorn's early days, he received an appointment to West Point thanks to his uncle Andrew, a guy we all called President Andrew Jackson, of all people.
I had no idea.
He did, and he
Wow.
enrolled in that star-studded West Point class of 1842. Who's in that class? This is such personalities as William Rosecrans, Mary, George Sykes, James Longstreet, D.H. Hill, Abner Doubleday, probably captain of the baseball team. They were all in that class. Van Dorn's going to graduate 52nd out of 56, just like you. So he was in the top 92% of his class. We're looking at the glass being half full. When he graduates, he's going to be appointed a breveted second lieutenant in that 7th United States Infantry, and he's going to begin his military career in Alabama and Florida, mostly, primarily. Now, when he finishes graduation, he's going to get himself married to a woman named Caroline Goldbalt in December of 1843. And a few years later, we're not going to go into too deep of his history, but he's going to find himself in the Mexican War, where he did pretty well. He was stationed in Brownsville, Texas, where he helped defend Fort Brown, helped actually raise the flag there. And soon later, he's going to go south of the border, and he's going to see action at Monterey, Churubusco, Contreras, a lot of these places, Sierra Gordon. And he's going to find himself breveted as a captain now. So he's kind of moving along and kind of fulfilling that prophecy that he wants. Van Dorn is also a guy who enjoyed being upfront, and he had the ego and the confidence to kind of do it without a doubt, with no fears. After Mexico, he fought along in the Seminole Wars, where he showed a humanitarian side. I don't know if you know this, Mary, but back then they had these things called pandemics. They did.
No, I don't recall ever experiencing one of those before.
And in the Gulf of Mexico, in Mississippi, they had a yellow fever pandemic going on at this time, which is ravaging the whole area. Now, during this yellow fever pandemic, Van Dorn actually worked on the front line, tending to people with yellow fever. And the victims, I mean, dare I say, he was not yellow and exposing himself. And it wouldn't be the first time he exposed himself, but it's a different type, to this type of disease. But it showed his personal bravery. Soon he's going to find himself in Texas, where he'll become a captain of the 2nd U.S. Cavalry. And on March 3rd, 1855, he'll report to his commander, a guy named Albert Sidney Johnson, and also his lieutenant colonel, a guy named Robert E. Lee, of all people. That's who he's reporting to. Now here, Van Dorn is going to be in that 2nd U.S. Cavalry. He's going to fight those Comanches. And this is when he's going to get shot in the Wichita expedition. He's got shot in the arrow, and he pulls it straight through all the way through because he doesn't want it to infect and screw himself up. So this is the type of guy he was and the risk he had. Probably lucky to survive. Think about it. Now, being a Mississippi guy, he was, when the Civil War started, Earl Van Dorn was a big states' rights guy. He'll resign his commission on January 31st, 1861, pretty much right when Mississippi secedes. And Van Dorn's a confident fellow. And he had the ego the size of your fridge. He just did. And he started his Confederate career in the infantry in Texas, but he was later called to Virginia, where he will take over that 1st Confederate Cavalry. And that legend of Earl Van Dorn is going to take off here. So January 1862, Van Dorn is commanding a division, and he'll be selected to command the Trans-Mississippi District. We talked about that with P. Ridge. You probably don't remember, but he had to play the role. He had to play the role of peacemaker, if you remember,
Yeah.
between two of his subordinates, Sterling Price and Benjamin McCulloch.
Oh, right,
And
because they were mean girling it.
they didn't like each other too much, right? Van Dorn's personality and his arrogance, though, did weigh on everyone. I mean, he was a pain. It just did. He's that guy in the bar who just, dude, shut up.
Oh, he's
You know,
like
that's
Hooker.
how.
He was like Hooker in that way, like the guy in the
Yeah,
bar that won't shut up and gets
he
in
probably
fights.
was. He almost got into a duel with Nathan Bedford Forrest over his mouth one time.
That
And
is a guy I would not want to duel with.
you know, and it didn't happen. Someone told Van Dorn you might want to step aside of this one, which he did. Um, all along, though, he had an eye for the ladies, and he had no shame concealing his feelings towards women. He openly flirted with women, and his primary type was a female who could fog a mirror. That was his type, and that's what it was. It was everybody. Right
So
now, this is everything. Don't forget too, he's married now. Despite being married, it is said that Van Dorn fathered 3 illegitimate children in Texas with a woman named Martha Goodbread, while his family waited for him in Mississippi. Boys will be boys, right?
Yep.
Van Dorn is very much also, he wanted to be looked upon on that level, that Jeb Stuart level, right, of his contemporaries. And he wanted that military glory. So, but despite his bravery, he had some bumps in the road. And we talked about Pea Ridge. We're going to talk just real quick. Arkansas, March 7th, 8th, 1862. He's going to basically mismanage his troops. He is going to gift wrap a victory and hand it directly to the Army of the Southwest, led by Judge Samuel Curtis and Franz Sigel.
Yep.
On the artillery, remember that?
Yep.
After that defeat, Van Dorn is going to message Secretary of War Judah Benjamin, and he's going to tell him, and I quote, of Pea Ridge, "I was not defeated. I only failed in my intentions," which sounds like something the GM of the Red Sox probably said.
Wasn't your intention to win?
No,
and beat
there
the
you go.
Army?
So
that is such a
piece.
I don't know. That sounds like a very if you a government way to put something.
Exactly.
I failed in my intention.
I failed in my intentions.
I'll have to remember that one.
Fail. You know, you probably will. He also got badly beaten at Corinth in October of 1862 by his former classmate William Rosecrans, and he made his own men charge a heavily fortified position, wave after wave of assaults. And finally, Van Dorn's going to get hauled up in a court of military inquiry. He'll get off. Again, not the first time I'll say that. But he was exonerated. But that stink of failure and incompetence really stuck to him like the stink of the Cleveland Indians playoff loss. It just never seems to go away, right? I'm just saying.
You have to bring back such bad memories for me.
I know. I made fun of the Red Sox. But Van Dorn did have his greatest moment, December 20th of 1862. This, of course, being when he raided U.S. Grant supplies at Holly Springs. He's going to catch 1,500 prisoners. He's going to bag $1.5 million in Union supplies. He's going to destroy it. But for Grant, this disaster early in the Vicksburg campaign, he had that political issue of that General Order number 11 going on at the same time.
Yeah,
so it was Grant's.
Good.
It was U.S. Grant's want to get away moment was right there for the most part.
Is this when he goes on the 3-day bender too?
That was a little bit later on.
Oh, that's right.
This Holly Springs experience really is what got Van Dorn back in the good graces again, because he'd been rolling up the L's one after the other until this. Soon after Holly Springs, Van Dorn is going to get promoted to the commander of the Department of Mississippi in East Louisiana, and he got the pleasure of being sent by Joseph E. Johnson to join Braxton Bragg's Army of Tennessee as a commander of the cavalry. So you got a Van Dorn and Braxy. What could possibly go wrong, right? As cavalry commander, Van Dorn did see this gig as an opportunity to regain that image of this military hero in the South. He has his headquarters set up at a place called Martin Shear's Mansion in the small town of Spring Hill, Tennessee. This town is about 40 miles south of Nashville. It's about 40 miles west of Murfreesboro. Van Dorn basically is in charge of the town, and he enjoyed the time there as a socialite and someone who spent a lot of time enjoying chasing those lovely ladies of Spring Hill. Mm-hmm. Here, Van Dorn was referred to by the terror of ugly husbands. That's what people called him.
Terror of ugly husbands.
That's what they called him. Okay, there you go. But at Spring Hill, Confederate officers mingled in town. They enjoyed those nightly dances. They had luncheons. You just picture exactly what it must have been like. These guys are all rock stars, right? Van Dorn was the biggest star of them all, and he became the focus of the attention by a woman whose name was Jessie Helen Kysick Peters, who also dazzled. She basically, she was basically in awe of this guy. He had red hair, cavalry commander. Speaking of that, I don't know if you know this, but today is National Kiss a Ginger Day, so maybe that has something to do with this too. Who knows, right?
I had no idea he had red hair.
He did. So
That's
he did, but he was looked the part. Peters, Jesse was half of his age, and was someone who was, according to locals, she had thick brown hair and reportedly a fine figure. Now, I Googled her, so you might want to Google her and judge for yourself on that one. But anyway, soon Van Dorn and Peters became close. Now they were seen riding in a carriage together and quickly became the gossip of the town. Now, even if they were single, riding in a carriage unsupervised at that time would have been a big deal.
yeah, I was gonna say, like, riding in a carriage, that's probably code for, like,
Right.
we're dating.
Well, who knows? But they're both married, and everyone, they don't really know Van Dorn's background, but they certainly know Peter's background. So Jesse Peters, like I just mentioned, was married to a retired doctor named George Peters, who happened to be her cousin, by the way. Whatever, okay, whatever.
Well, it happens, right?
I don't know, it was, but even for Van Dorn though, this was reckless. It was,
Yeah.
especially since Van Dorn and George Peters knew each other kind of well. They
Yeah.
kind of did. So the whole thing was, next on Springer, written all over it.
Well, he's not
So,
doing the whole Philip Barton Key. Is it Barton Key with Sickles' wife?
with
Remember
Sickles?
that?
Oh, yeah.
Like with
Oh,
the
yeah.
red bandana on the bang barn and
But
taking her
they were
there.
at least trying to be discreet. This is not. Now, this affair here between Van Dorn and Jesse Peters, all these allegations, there's a lot of stories about this, and a lot of the stories are hearsay we're going to talk about too. But you can imagine the rumors. Dr. Peters, he owned a property in Union Hill, Nashville, and due to his friendship with Van Dorn, he was able to regularly get a pass to cross Union lines to go visit his property in Nashville, which was being held and controlled by the federal government. Now, while her husband was away, Jesse would visit Van Dorn's home allegedly wearing a tight riding black outfit and a black bonnet with an ostrich flume. We all know what that means. We have the ostrich flume.
Ooh.
You know she means business, right? but when she arrived at his home, the woman who owned the home, she she stops at the door and she goes to walk in. The woman kind of stops Jesse Peters and says, "You just can't go walking up to this guy's bedroom. This is 1900. This is not
Yeah.
2021. It's not
Yeah.
Goderich here, So Jesse Peters is going to brush right by this woman, go right up the stairs into Van Dorn's bedroom, where I assume they read scripture, is what they did for the next and talk
Most
battle
likely, yeah.
formations. But what happened was when Dr. Peters returned, the house madam is going to tell him what's going on. And she's going to quickly tell Van Dorn, who's been staying at her house, to get out. You're out of here, which she does. Now, Van Dorn's going to send a messenger to deliver a note to Jesse at Peters' house. I mean, he's brash, he's brazen, which is going to get intercepted by Dr. Peters. And allegedly, Peters took the message and he said, "Tell your whiskey-headed master, if he sets foot on my lawn, I'll blow my brains out where he stands." That is the best get off my lawn speech right there.
Wow.
Just saying. And so, but Van Dorn wasn't going to let that bother him. He's going to continue to reach out to Jesse. On April 12th of 1863, Dr. Peters is going to hide outside his house after telling Jesse that he's going to be leaving for a bit. And lo and behold, who comes coming down the primrose path is Van Dorn again. He's going to show up, and Dr. Peters is going to confront both of them. And allegedly, when he burst in, they were probably playing Twister or something, but he was not happy. So basically, Dr. Peters, Jesse, and Earl Van Dorn are going to get in some big verbal fight, screaming and yelling. Peters is going to threaten to divorce Jesse, and she's laughing at him, saying, "Oh, there's no way you would. You'll never do that." Blah blah blah. Somehow they settle down. Earl Van Dorn leaves. They calm down. They go back to bed. They calm down. Whatever. So, and not soon after that, Dr. Peters is going to visit Van Dorn at his headquarters to get on the pass to Nashville, and this is something that maybe Peters went there to try to get a written confession out of him for this, but who knows? Okay, either way, when Van Dorn, he's going to walk in. Van Dorn's going to be sitting there, and he's going to be sitting in a chair, and Van Dorn is basically going to laugh at him. He's going to turn away, and when he turns away, Dr. Peters is going to pull out a gun and shoot him in the back of the head and kill him, blow his head off right there.
Wow.
And most think, and here's the thing though, and this is what's interesting about this as you study this, and that's kind of the general thoughts of what happened with this, because most think Peters killed him for violating the sanctity of his marriage, and that's not what the most theories. But there are other theories, and this is where it's interesting. There's a book that I found called "Where Elephants Fought: The Murder of Confederate General Earl Van Dorn" by an author. Her name is Bridget Smith. Now, this is what she claims. According to her book, she says that Dr. Peters killed Van Dorn not for sleeping with his wife, but also he was sleeping with their 19-year-old daughter who was pregnant. Now,
Oh
this
my
and,
God.
and now she makes out a pretty good case for this. I mean, Smith does claim that that's the reason why, but there are some doubts because there are some records who show that he didn't even have a daughter 19. He had two boys, but who the hell knows? But these are the type of stories that are going around. There's another story that says Dr. Peters and Jesse were Union spies all along, and the killing of such a high-ranking Confederate general would be rewarded by the return of that property that they lost. And this has pretty much been debunked too, for the most part. But it just goes to show a lot of the theories that flew around. But it's interesting that the Peters they did divorce, but you know what happens later? They get remarried.
Yeah.
Not too long after they get remarried, and they have a daughter. The daughter's name is Medora, and there was the rumor that the daughter was whose son, or who was whose daughter, Earl
EVDs.
Van Dorn.
Yeah.
But there's some problems with that too, because the dates don't quite line up.
Yeah.
I mean, she had to be pregnant like a year and a half for that to be true. But there's a lot of urban myths about him, and so he was someone who definitely had some bad decisions, no question about that. So going back to the resolution thing that we're talking about, I would think the obvious resolution with Earl Van Dorn is to stop looking for love in all the wrong places, because I think that's probably what's going to get him in trouble. So, long story. That's what happened with Earl Van Dorn. But I think if he had it to do over again, he might. Looking forward to the next year, he might say, "I'm going to try to use a little bit better judgment."
Yeah,
I
maybe
think.
not with the married
Um,
ladies. Maybe just try and settle down a little bit. His story, I was just thinking this. He, I don't know. I don't know if you would agree with this, but I think in some ways he's a lot like the Dan Sickles of the Confederacy. Now he's not a political general. Obviously, he's educated at West Point. Dan Sickles wasn't. Dan Sickles is a political general, but he's got that kind of like, I mean, Sickles loved the women, and he got himself into trouble with women as well.
no, I
And I don't know, there seems to be this kind of this party boy um aspect of the two of them, and I was kind of, as you're telling his story, I'm like, wow, this has some parallels in a way with Dan Sickles. Now Dan Sickles is at the receiving end though of an affair, or not the receiving end, I shouldn't say. He's the one that is, the wife is having the affair,
right.
but his life after the Civil War kind of reminds me of Earl Van Dorn.
Earl Van Dorn's an interesting guy because this is a guy who wanted that lifestyle.
Yeah.
He's like the musician who wants to be famous and live the rock star
Yeah.
lifestyle. Was what he did. He had you can talk about Corinth, you can talk about Pea Ridge, you can talk about a lot of the things he did, but you can't deny what he did at Holly Springs because that was his
No.
high moment, no question about it.
Yeah.
But he took that high moment, parlayed into a better position where he took advantage in his vice that he could not control.
Mm.
Um, and that he's by no means he's not the only guy with this issue,
Oh
but
no.
he's one that it's a sexy story because of how it all played out. The fact that he was actually killed by it,
Yeah.
and like we said, there's a lot of rumors of why it happened. The only thing you know for a fact is that George Peters did kill Earl Van Dorn, and the reality is it had to do with his wife. But these are all the stories
There's
that
a
were
story
going
of
on.
possibly he could have been sleeping with the daughter as well. But then, I've read stories too where I think it was around the time of, I don't know if it was around the time of Battle of Franklin or something. She pops up again, and like men are staying at her house and stuff. And apparently
Yep.
she was like sleeping with some of them.
Who knows? Who knows how it is? But she definitely she definitely got herself around a little bit. But they did get remarried, and they both kind of drifted off into history at the end. But who knows? He's an interesting guy. But I would say if he had it to do over again, he might have shown a little more discretion. Maybe said no once in a while to
Yep.
himself. But that's the thing. So what do you got? What's your story?
Well, speaking of rock stars, I'm gonna go with one of probably, he's the guy who's considered, I can kind of the first celebrity general, William Sherman, because after the war he's very much like a celebrity, going to the opera and plays and all that. But I'm going to talk about Sherman. So Sherman, just quickly, I mean, we talked about him a lot on this podcast. He is born in 1820 in Ohio, passes away February 14th, 1891 in New York City. When he's 16 years old, he's going to attend West Point. And he's roommates with George Henry Thomas. He's also there at the same time as General Rosecrans. Rosecrans would describe Sherman as one of the brightest and most popular fellows. So Sherman is quite popular at West Point. Now, in his memoirs, Sherman does write, yeah, I was there, and you know what? I could have done a lot better had I, shined my buttons and kind of not been such a jackass at times.
By the way, again, another ginger.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Oh my God. There is a definite pattern here with the gingers.
That was unintentional, actually.
It was. Yeah. It was totally unintentional. Right. But he says, he basically implies like, oh, I could have done better at West Point had I, actually applied myself a little bit more. But he does graduate pretty high in his class. After West Point, he's going to be in Florida, involved in the Seminole Wars. He's going to be out in California. He's not involved in the Mexican War at all because he's in California at the time. And that's something I think, if you read his memoirs, I think it's something he kind of regrets, not being a part of that, because Grant was part of it. Obviously, James Longstreet, all those guys are down there, and he's like stuck out in California. Mm-hmm. So he ends up leaving the Army, and he's like, he's a lot like Grant when he leaves the Army. He's a failed banker. He's a failed lawyer. He can't seem to function outside of being in the Army. He needs that discipline. And he realizes that when he meets up with, it's when he's a lawyer, and he's at, I think it's his brother's firm or something out in, what would be like kind of the prairies and stuff. And he meets up with one of his own Army buddies, and he realizes like, oh shit, I miss this lifestyle. So 1859, he becomes superintendent of the Louisiana State Seminary, which is later going to be Louisiana State University.
Go Tigers.
But
with an X.
Yes. Secession happens. Yep. And he leaves. But not before telling his good friend, who's also there, basically says, like, you want to make war against us in the North? Good luck, because it's going to be a long, drawn-out affair, but we're going to win in the end. I basically summed up, in one or two sentences what he says in 3 paragraphs. It's actually quite a brilliant speech he gives to his friend.
Well done.
Anyway, so he's going to be a colonel in the 13th U.S. Infantry at Bull Run. He ends up getting moved to the Department of the Cumberland under Robert Anderson, who, as we know, was at Fort Sumter. He's the commanding officer there. And Sherman ends up having a breakdown, and he has to leave the Army for a while. It gets pretty serious. Some of his friends and even his wife were really afraid that he was going to commit suicide. It gets really bad because of how the press treats him. Like, the press says that he's gone insane. And I think this kind of begins Sherman's hate relationship with the press. Like, Sherman does not like the media at all. I think he said something along the lines of, like, if we killed all the reporters, we'd be getting reports from hell by noon. If you kill them at 9 a.m.
Bill Belichick also said that.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I think Sherman said, so I think it's Sherman who said it too. But anyway, he doesn't like the media at all. And I think this breakdown factors into it, but he rejoins the Army, gets reinstated, and March 1st, 1862, he's going to be assigned to be under the command of General Grant, which is exactly what he wanted. The two of them are very good friends. And there's that, that famous quote from Sherman, I stood by Grant when he was drunk, and he stood by me when I was crazy. And so anyway, he's going to join the Army of West Tennessee as commander of the 5th Division. And that's where our story starts with what I'm going to be talking about regarding Sherman, and it's at the Battle of Shiloh. Shiloh, they're at Pittsburgh Landing. Sherman's in the area of Shiloh Church. That's where they're camped, and things have been pretty quiet. There's been some skirmishing going on, some fighting. They know the Confederates are in the area. They don't know how many. They don't know, what's going to happen and all that. But that's where the problem begins. Is they don't know, and I think they kind of start making assumptions that maybe nothing is going to happen. Here's what happens. April 5th, there's rumors starting to circulate in the federal camp that the Confederate General Albert Sidney Johnston is planning to launch a surprise attack. Many Union troops just laughed it off. They're like, no, they're not here, because it's partly because Sherman is telling them, oh, they're in Corinth. They're not here. So Captain W.B. Mason of the 77th Ohio suggests to Sergeant C.J. Eagler and Private Samuel Tracy that they walk beyond the picket line just to see what's going on. A quarter mile beyond the picket line, they could see a strong force of Confederate infantry and artillery. Eagler reports this to Major D.B. Fearing, who said it would go to Sherman at once. And Sherman finds out and he's furious. He gets angry and he orders Sergeant Eagler to be placed under arrest for spreading false information. But Mason and his commanding officer, Mason, ends up protecting him from that. So this is the first instance where Sherman is getting word that maybe it's a lot more than what we think, and maybe they will be attacking us soon. Colonel Hildebrand goes to find out what exactly is going on. Mason again explains to him what he has seen. The Confederate cavalry is in the distance. There was also a lot of rabbits and squirrels running around, which was very telling of a large-scale movement, meaning that soldiers were in the area. If you can see the animals leaving the area, then odds are, there's humans headed towards us. That's
You don't want to mess with the squirrel brigade.
No, that's what happened at Shaw.
You don't want to mess with
That's
them.
what happened
Trust
at
me.
Chancellorsville. The first thing that von Gilsa saw was a bunch of animals running out of the woods.
I know that.
Oh, that's not normal.
It was animals. Then it was Howard, and then it was von Gilsa. Okay, I'm sorry.
Anyway, and Hildebrand also saw the Confederates, their shining musket barrels as well. And he goes back to Shiloh Church to tell Sherman, but again, Sherman does not believe him. So noon on April the 5th, there are some Confederates that exchange fire with some of the 75th Ohio, and the Rebs ride away pretty quickly from that. But the most well-known story of the Confederates being closer than what Sherman thinks at Shiloh involves a man by the name of Colonel Jesse Appler of the 53rd Ohio. He notices some rebel cavalry about half a mile away from where he is camped. He dispatched some of his men to go to them. They're unable to catch them, but they pursue until they're fired upon by the rebels. And these are actually General Hardee's pickets. So these are some of and who's under General Hardee? I think it's Patrick Cleburne. So these are some of Cleburne's guys. Appler sends Lieutenant J.W. Fulton to tell Sherman, and Sherman's reply: "Tell Colonel Appler to take his damned regiment back to Ohio. There's no force of the enemy nearer than Corinth." Again, he's kind of brushing it off. Well, not really brushing it off. He's basically saying there's nobody here. They're not here. So then Grant does send a message. Grant gets involved in this, and he's sending a message to Buell telling him the Confederates are in Corinth. But he still needs Buell to get towards Shiloh just in case, right? Sherman tells Grant, "All is quiet along my lines now. The enemy has cavalry in our front, and I think there are 2 regiments of infantry and 1 battery of artillery about 2 miles out." So he's kind of guesstimating, but from what, the men, including Appler, have told him, there's got to be a lot more there. Sherman also felt that nothing would happen but picket firing. I will not be drawn out far unless with certainty of advantage, and I do not apprehend anything like an attack on our position. And he's saying this a day before the Battle of Shiloh. Colonel William H. Graves of the 12th Michigan could hear movements in the distance, but Prentiss tells him it's nothing. There's no cavalry. They're not there. They're just pickets, right? Now, the other thing that the Federals are in possession of is prisoners from the 1st Alabama. They told the Union that their army would be destroyed and the Rebs were about to strike. And one wounded Alabamian told Hildebrand that the Union army was going to be attacked in less than 12 hours. And Hildebrand goes to see Sherman, and Sherman laughs it off. And Sherman, in his memoirs, he doesn't really make mention of these reports of the rebels. Now, in some of the letters, he'll say, "Oh, we think there's cavalry in the area," or whatever. But in his, in the memoirs, when he's talking about Shiloh, he just basically says the 5th is pretty quiet. He just says, "From April 1st, we were conscious that the rebel cavalry was in our front, and they were getting bolder and more saucy." He uses the word saucy a lot.
Can't beat that word.
I think we need
That's
to
a
bring
good
that
word
back. April 5th. This is the day where he's getting all the reports. There's 2 or 3 different reports he gets. He says April 5th passed without any unusual event. Sherman was acting upon believing he was the invading army. Therefore, he didn't feel the need to fortify against an attack. He had no orders to do so, and he also believed it would have made the men too timid. So when I was researching this, that got me thinking, like, well, so what could he have done? So Appler goes to him, and these other guys go to him, and he's like, well, what are we going to do? I guess it would have given him time to fortify, but he just kind of shrugs it off. He also says on April 5th to Grant, I have no doubt that nothing will occur today than some picket firing. The enemy is saucy, but we will not press our pickets far. And again, I do not apprehend anything like an attack on our position. Flash forward to April the 6th, the morning, and they start to hear firing. And Sherman knows something is going on. So he and his staff have just finished breakfast, and that's when he receives word too, in addition to hearing stuff, received word the Confederates are on the march. So he rides out to investigate. And Sherman's staff member, Thomas D. Holliday, is killed right in front of him, much the same way that Groucho is killed next to Rosecrans at the Battle of Stones River. And the fire came from in front of none other than Appler's camp, the guy that had went and reported to Sherman that there was definitely rebels there, and they were definitely a lot closer than Corinth. Sherman ends up getting shot in the hand, and that's when he said, my God, we are attacked. And that's when he realized, shit, they're here. They're a lot closer than what we thought. The aftermath of Shiloh, as we all know, is still to this day debated. It's very confusing. There's still conflicting reports as to exactly what happened. Like, were they surprised? My opinion in doing this research, reading a little more, Grant and Sherman were definitely surprised by the rebels. Like, Sherman is, I don't know if the right word is ignore, but he's really brushing off what his subordinates are telling him. It was said of Shiloh that's probably no single battle of the war gave rise to such wild and damaging reports. It was publicly asserted at the North that our army was completely taken by surprise. There were lots of rumors, and that's what Sherman had to say about it. Like I said, it's still debated if the Union was caught off guard. Grant said, as to the talk of surprise here, nothing could be more false. If the enemy had sent word when and how they would attack, we could not have been more prepared. Well, first of all, Grant, the enemy is not going to tell you when they're going to attack. Albert Sidney Johnston is not going to be like, I'm going to attack you here, just to let you know, right? I think this is Grant's way. And this is, Grant, amazing general, and Sherman is very talented too, but they were definitely caught off guard here. And Sherman said to his brother John, we knew the enemy was in our front, but in what form we could not tell, and I was always ready for an attack. But then 2 weeks later, he writes to John and says, I confess I did not think Beauregard would abandon his railroad to attack at our base. General Lew Wallace saves the Union Army at Monocacy. He said he saves the country too. He said the army was definitely taken by surprise. And now some would say Lew is saying that because of how Grant threw him under the bus, but Grant does throw him under the bus in this. And I think it's to kind of deflect away from the mistake that Sherman made in not being prepared for the morning of April the 6th when he is attacked. The lower ranks as well. That's the interesting thing about looking at Shiloh is the lower ranks as well. They all say we were caught by surprise. William H. Chamberlain of the 81st Ohio says that they were entirely ignorant of the presence of the enemy until the firing began. And another lieutenant said the surprise was never more complete. So getting back to the resolution, it's basically, if you get enough reports, pay attention, check it out, and make sure so that you don't get caught by surprise again. But I think in this case, Sherman did learn, because I don't think he was ever caught off guard like this again. And I mean, I've studied Shiloh before, but really studying this was so interesting to see, how Grant and Sherman reacted to this.
Yeah.
And just how they kind of, like, Sherman is brushing off all these reports of that they're right there. And the interesting part is like, when the shots happen, it's right by Appler's camp. Can you imagine being Appler? Like,
It's instant karma right
like, oh
there.
God, you know, I feel bad for Appler in all this as well. Um,
Mm.
but that's mine. It's Sherman about Shiloh. I definitely want to look at it a lot more now. I find this so fascinating. Just all these different reports that are coming in, and
Yeah.
Sherman is just like, nope, they're not there. And whether he's doing it to keep morale high or because he, honest to God, does not believe they're there, or if he
I don't know,
does, he
Mary.
thinks they're in a small force.
Well, he learned a valuable lesson. He probably forgot that lesson at Chickasaw, but for the most
Oh
part,
yes, yeah, Chickasaw. Did he? I
you
guess
know,
he did get caught off guard again, but
but
yeah,
he did learn his lesson. So that's a good one. So maybe if that's the case for him, that would definitely be the case. So I got one more for you, Mary.
yep.
And this is, of course, is the person I want to talk to next is about Ellis Spear. Everybody knows Ellis Spear. He's
The
one of the
disgruntled
characters.
temp.
One of the movies, one of the characters. The movie Gettysburg was played by Donald Logue. He was a captain of Company G in the 20th Maine. Is portrayed, as you said, that disgruntled office employee to his boss,
Yep.
Joshua Chamberlain. Now, we'll talk about a lot of the speculation between these two. But real quick, Spear was born on October 15th of 1834 in the tiny town of Warren, Maine, a town right between Portland and Bangor. It was named after Joseph Warren, the hero of Bunker Hill. Mary, we were there a few weeks ago.
Great
That's what the
tavern.
town was named after. Warren, Maine was a very small town back then, about 2,000 people. It's a small town today of about 5,000 people, so some things don't change. It's pretty much the same. Oh, fun fact though, Mary, the town of Warren, you know what its claim to fame is in the United States? In 1853, they elected a woman. Her name was Olive Rose to the Registrar of Deeds, and she was the first woman in U.S. history to ever be elected to U.S. office.
Very
So
cool.
yeah, there you go, Warren, Maine, going to England. Now, Spear is pretty much best known for his post-war feud, quotation fingers, with Joshua
Mm-hmm.
Chamberlain. Now, the story is interesting in its own right for Spear. Now, Spear was a graduate of Bowdoin College in the class of 1858. He was not a classmate of Chamberlain, although he was a student at one point. And when the Civil War began, Spear was studying for the bar exam. He was also teaching at a small school in the town of Wiscasset, Maine, not far away. In the fall of 1862, Abraham Lincoln, the guy with the hat we talk about from time to time, he's going to ask the country for an additional 300,000 volunteers to put down the rebellion. And Spear not only signed up, but like Rufus Dawes, he offered to raise an entire company from Wiscasset as well as his hometown of Warren. Now, he had them signing 87 guys, and they were assigned to Company G of the 20th Maine. And before Gettysburg, he'll ultimately become a temporary major of that regiment. He's going to kind of move along now. Despite becoming the commander of the 20th Maine and later a brigade commander right up until Appomattox, Spear's most famous day is without a doubt on July 2nd, 1863, on that hillside just west of Tawnytown Road over there in Gettysburg. And of course, known today as Little Round Top.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the story of Little Round Top is, real quick, it's a fixture in American history. On the battle's second day, in my opinion, the most decisive day of that battle, William C. Oates' 15th Alabama. They're going to be attacking that Union left flank that was anchored on Little Round Top and was held by Joshua Chamberlain's 20th Maine. The narrative, of course, is that Oates' men are going to continue to try to flank the Mainers. Chamberlain's going to be low on ammunition, and he's going to order his men to fix bayonets and swing down the slope on the hill, forcing the Alabamans to retreat to save the Union flank on the 2nd of July. Who knows if there was music playing as they were running? Like, who knows? But a few days after the battle, though, this is on July 6th, 1863, Chamberlain's going to write to his first lieutenant, a guy named George Herendeen. He's in the 5th Corps. He's the acting adjutant general. And he's going to say that we maintain the defense no longer. At last desperate resort, I ordered a bayonet charge, and the men dashed forward with a shout to sweep away the attacking Confederates. Now, this is where the legend of Chamberlain ordering the bayonet charge begins. The word charge is important because this is what's going to be refuted. Now, Chamberlain is basically going to repeat the same story to his wife Fanny. He's going to tell her, we not only held our ground, but charged on the rebels. And this was written the day after the battle, on the 4th of July, probably during the fireworks show. But after the war ended, in the conversations began about who actually did what. Many, including Chamberlain, would write their own stories about this, often embellishing their roles, which was more common than uncommon at the time. I mean, we talk about this a million times in the memoirs. Chamberlain was a brilliant writer who loved to talk about glory, not only for himself, but also for his 20th Maine, as well as the Union Army in general. Now, he had a very chivalrous attitude towards war, and more than most. And for a person like Ellis Spear, the problem was that Spear didn't see glory; he saw misery out of it, and he did. And that was a big issue for them. Now, after the war, Ellis Spear's diary was published by his grandson named Abbott Spear. Now, this is later on now in a book that came out called The Civil War Recollections of General Ellis Spear. Now, as you can imagine, the Battle of Gettysburg is going to take a lot of it. That's going to be his big day. Ellis Spear's entry on July 2nd explains, this is the date of the battle now. This is according to Spear on that day. We fought at close quarters more than 2 hours. They flanked us and hurt us severely. Our men fell rapidly. At last, we charged them and took many prisoners. So you can see the difference. He's talking about the fact that he saw a lot of bloody crap going on here.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't talking about bravery and all that other stuff. Spear was a guy who actually hated war. He hated the glorification of it. He hated everything. He saw war as work of the job of saving the Union, and he cared very, very, very much for his men. He would help nurse his men back to health when they were injured. He would personally find and bury some of the dead of his own men. That's how he was. He actually married a woman named Sarah. Her name was Sarah Foster, who was the widow of a guy named Samuel Keene, also from Maine. He was a soldier who died in his arms at the Battle of Petersburg in 1864. And he ends up marrying the ex. I don't know how that goes, but after the war, and contrary to what a lot of people think, Spear and Chamberlain, they actually maintained a good friendship.
Mm.
I mean, a lot of people think they hate each other. They really did.
I was of that impression. Right? I didn't think they liked each other at all.
And this is right up until Chamberlain died in 1914, right around there. But the interpretations of the war kind of strain their friendship off and on throughout. It's like having two good friends, and there's something happens between the two, and they don't want to bring it up. When they do, they argue about it, but they're still friends. That's kind of how it was. They weren't these enemies of each other. They were actually quite close right into the very end. And the crux of the difference was at their greatest moment for probably each of them, which is Little Round Top at Gettysburg. Spear, being a soldier, didn't share Chamberlain's vision of that story, which is told in Killer Angels and came later on in the movie. Mm-hmm. Spear had the belief that the charge that Chamberlain wrote about, that he ordered the bayonet charge, was actually ordered not by Colonel Chamberlain, but by a guy he was a first lieutenant named Holman Melcher from Company F. And the story is also corroborated by a private named Theodore Garish. Now, Garish admittedly took the story from a second hand because he wasn't there. He was in the hospital in Philadelphia, but he had the story from somebody and he passed it on. And it just, who knows? But that's kind of how it goes. The story that goes, it's just a battle ebbed and flowed, and there was a lull between these endless charges of these Alabamians, right? While the 20th Maine is resetting their lines, they noticed that some of the wounded of the 20th were kind of lying in no man's land. Mm-hmm. As the battle was going on, they got two boxers. As you're fighting, one of them slowly starts to move back. They realized that because they were moving back, their injured were not behind their lines anymore. They were in front of their lines, in between. So according to, so basically they wanted to move the lines up to protect these guys again. So according to Spear, he wrote, the line on the left of the colors pulled back a few feet, leaving wounded lying in front of the line. Someone proposed advancing to a point beyond the wounded men, move the line up a little bit so these guys aren't in front of the lines anymore. Okay, the man who moved these men to the left to move forward, protect these guys, was Melcher. Now Garish, that private we mentioned before, wasn't there. He's going to write in his memoirs that he was obviously told, with a cheer and a flash of Melcher's sword that sent an inspiration along the line, full 10 paces to the front he sprang, yelling, "Come on, boys!" And again, the color guard saw them moving, and they all followed him. And once the other men saw the flag going down the hill, they all went, and they all charged. That's the story that Spear tells. It isn't Chamberlain rotating like a door, and just like the movie says. The whole story was they saw the flags going, and they all started running after him. And that's how the charge went. Now, Chamberlain did order bayonets. He did order to fix bayonets, but no one heard him say charge. He says he ordered it. And this is that fog of war. And don't forget, it's loud, there's stuff going on. And but there are problems with this story too, because every story's got problems. This story would assume Melcher was on the left, but
Yep.
even Melcher admits he was in the middle because he was standing right near Chamberlain. If he was in the middle and he went forward, the line would have broken apart. So that story's even questionable. But that's what Spear swears. That's what he says. Chamberlain himself, he's going to pretty much admit that. And he's going to say that, and he's going to give Melcher, Chamberlain, his credit for basically saving a lot and saving his own life. Do you remember that scene in the movie Gettysburg when he goes running down the hill and the guy pulls the gun on him
Yep.
and he clicks?
Yep.
That scene's actually true. It's
wow.
embellished a little bit.
Yeah.
Chamberlain writes about this story. He writes, Melcher came dashing in up to my side. Now, this is actually Chamberlain's going down the hill. Melcher's going to run up to him and stand next to him. I was in front of the commanding officer of rebels, Lieutenant Robert Wicker from the 15th Alabama. He fired one shot at me, and I raised my saber when I raised my saber when he handed me his sword and pistol and surrendered. The gun didn't jam; he just fired, but he had Melcher next to him, so he knew he couldn't kill both of them. So he decided to surrender. So that seems sort of true, but that was because of Melcher. Nonetheless, years later in 1913, Spear is going to publish an account of the Battle of Little Round Top, crediting Company F and Holman Melcher specifically with starting the actual charge. Spear never even mentioned in his battle account Joshua Chamberlain, not a name. They didn't mention him. Now, according to Spear, it was Melcher who suggested the movement forward to protect those wounded men, and he's going to write in his diary proposing that he said to move the men forward. They took it as a charge, and they all acted accordingly. That's roughly you can kind of see how that probably would have happened. But remember, these stories, like I said before, are all part of this heat of battle in real time. And these stories are only in the eye of the beholder. Spear of that very moment, the actual battle, he writes in his memoir, I remember that there was noise so loud that the shouted orders could be scarcely heard, that bullets hissed all about, splinters flew from the trees, and men were dropping every second. Two things, no glory, and two, he couldn't hear shit. Chamberlain could have yelled, "We're all going to the Dairy Queen." He wouldn't have heard it. So you never know. So you never know if Chamberlain did.
Yeah.
But he doesn't hear it, and so in his memory, is what he sees is what he saw.
Yeah.
Much of this Spear Chamberlain controversy is really more contrived in modern day than back then, because even in his diary that he writes that appeared after the battle, what does Spear say? Colonel Chamberlain handled the regiment in splendid manner. No officer could be cooler and more skillful. He was personally complimented by brigade, division, and corps commanders. He might have even gone to look for Buster. We don't know. But all these stories that he talked about are true from this. So for Spear, it's clear, and I don't mean to rhyme, that the story of Little Round Top in Chamberlain has changed over time. There's no question it has. And the story that's true is the one you want to believe at the time. And that's pretty much the truth. So as a resolution goes for him, I would say that Ellis Spear would probably want to make sure that all of his stories basically stay straight, right?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, what makes history great, what really makes it great, is how it could be interpreted even by two men on opposing views of the same battle, what actually happened, when both their views change in time.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what's cool about it, is you will never know exactly what happened. The Never Chamberlain people are probably not gonna like the fact that Ellis Spear gives him credit, and Never Spear people aren't going to sit there and say that.
Yeah.
But you can sort of see how it went. At the end of the day, Little Round Top is a big part of American history, but how much it depends on who tells the story, and that's what's great about this. So I think old Ellis would probably he has two different versions of the same story based on the time of his life. And I think that's probably what it was. I think the reality, my own personal opinion, is Spear's version is correct, and he wanted to take care of the old man towards the end of his life in 1913.
Yeah.
And corroborate a lot of the stuff. But he did stay friendly with them. He did.
Yeah.
I
think that's the case for a lot. Even the ones that were fought on opposing sides. There was probably you look at somebody like a Barlow, or Barlow, who is friends with John Brown Gordon. I mean, they probably didn't talk about certain things, especially Gordon being involved in the KKK, right? probably because Barlow
That's usually come up in bar conversation.
no, Barlow was,
No.
probably not having that, and I'm sure Lew Wallace wasn't either. He was also friends with Gordon. The one thing about Speer's story that I don't know, I thought of this is, Speer not talking about Chamberlain in his battle report reminds me a lot of Blackjack Logan not mentioning Oliver Otis Howard in his battle report of Ezra Church. There was definitely, and that's, that goes back to the feeling. I think, sometimes you get in that moment of how you feel about something. And I wonder if Speer was just angry about something towards Chamberlain. And he's like, F him, I'm not going to put him in my battle report, because I'm sure that was Blackjack's line of thinking at the time of Ezra Church, because Blackjack had just been, found out, oh, you're not going to command Army of the Tennessee. We're going to give it to Oliver Otis Howard instead. And he left Howard out of the battlefield report. I think just because emotions were running high, right?
Oh, no, it's a question.
And once you calm down from that, you might see the story differently.
Mm-hmm. How about this? How about some impromptu, real quick, one-liners?
All right.
Say a name and tell me what his resolution is going to be.
Okay. Well, I actually
without the whole story, just the name and the resolution.
Okay. This is so my first one obviously is going to be Howard. Like Sherman, listen to your subordinates, specifically Von Gilsa at Chancellorsville.
Okay. Henry Kidd Douglas, Lost Order 191. Hold on to your damn paperwork. Don't lose it. Get a better pocket. Don't lose your paperwork. That's one.
My next one is two. Sheridan and Warren, check your ego at the door.
Good one. James Longstreet, Gettysburg, countercharge. Ask for directions. Just ask for them. Don't be a guy. Ask for directions.
Burnside, no gambling, because you might owe A.P. Hill money, and he might just use that as one of three things to spitefully march to Antietam and win the battle for the Confederates.
Very good. The 51st Pennsylvania, 51st New York at Antietam. These are the stories of the men who were charged by the Ninth Corps, by Edward Ferrero, to take that bridge. If you take that bridge, I will give you your whiskey back. You know what they did? They did it. Resolution: don't always do everything for alcohol. It can get you in a lot of trouble. Just say no. Just say no. Okay? Don't always make it about the alcohol. But thanks for your service. But next time, be a little more careful.
It's my next one. Zollicoffer at Mill Springs. Get your eyes checked.
Very good. One more for me. Samuel Mudd. Don't always answer the door late at night. Just stay in bed.
God.
Just stay in bed. Nothing good happens at 1 o'clock in the morning. Don't answer the door when it knocks. Just stay in bed. Stay in bed.
There's actually a lot. The one of the ones that I did think about.
You go all day with these.
Oh yeah, one of the ones that I did think about, and I actually did research into it, only to find out that, you know what? No, how I went into it is not how I feel about it at the end, and it was actually Beauregard at Shiloh, and the whole not attacking at night, and I do side with him on that after reading about what he had, at the information he had at the time. I understand why he pulled back. And then I read more about how Davis didn't like him, and Davis was kind of this cheerleader behind Beauregard sucks. He did wrong at Shiloh. Beauregard sending that telegram saying we won was not probably not a good idea, but he was acting on what he knew at the time, I think.
He probably did.
And he was one that I did think about. And one final one would be brag, be nicer to your subordinates, so that they don't make a big petition against you.
Pretty good idea. This is you can go with these for a while.
Oh yeah, I think we had some really good.
Jubilee at Cedar Creek. Don't count your chickens before they're hatched.
Yeah.
Play it all the way through. You
Longstreet,
the same thing for Beauregard.
Actually, Longstreet, regarding the direction thing, he kind of needed that going to Knoxville too. And then he ends up blaming Breckinridge for giving him a bad map.
Always blows my mind how these guys found their places from point A to point B.
Well, Sherman got lost going to Missionary Ridge, and he was like, Sherman is the last guy I would expect to get lost. But he ends up on Billy Goat Hill, and then he blames Baldy Smith for giving him a bad map.
Mm-hmm. Now, the big question for you, Mary, is what is your resolution?
I don't make New Year's resolutions.
Oh, okay.
I don't.
Okay, that's probably a good thing to do. You can never be disappointed with that.
Exactly.
Anyway, so what's coming up for us? I think we can put this to bed for now and get ready
Uh,
for the next one. So what's coming down the road for
so
us?
our next episode is going to be episode 99. We're going to be talking about General William Rosecrans finally, which
Oh,
I've been wanting to talk about him for a while. And then our episode 100, we are going to be joined by Alexander Rose to talk about the Confederate spies in Liverpool, which is based around his book, The Lion and the Fox, which just came out, I think it was in November or December of 2022. So it hasn't been published for very long. So if y'all
nope,
can
just
check
came
that
out.
book out, he's the one that's going to be on our next book club meeting. He's was kind of just a just an addition at random. So we're actually going to be doing 6 books this year. He's going to be our second one for 2023, and we will be having our book club meeting for that, as we said at the beginning of this episode, on February the 22nd at 6 o'clock
Mhm.
Eastern via Zoom.
Guys, not gonna lie to you, read that book. It is so
It's
cool.
really good.
If you like the espionage, if you like Navy, if you like some of the stuff that was going on, the cloak and dagger stuff going on in England and Liverpool,
Yeah.
while the Confederates trying to build a navy and try to break the blockade, it is so cool. And having him on is gonna be a lot of fun. So definitely do it. So off we go. So we'll look forward to that. We have our live on Sunday,
Yes,
Mary. I
live
don't know if
stream
you
on
said that or
Sunday.
not.
Yes, live stream on
Okay.
Sunday at 10 o'clock Eastern. We're on YouTube now instead of Facebook. So check out our YouTube channel. Subscribe to us on YouTube. We post our episodes on there, and they're full of bloopers as well because we just put the video right on there. But that's where we're also doing our live streams as well.
Definitely. All right. Well, Mary, have a happy New Year. Everybody out there, have a happy and safe New Year. Hopefully, you guys are staying warm. You're staying dry, and we will go on to the next one, Mary. So, as usual, as always, say many times, the pleasure is always yours. And if everybody out there, enjoy the rest of your weekend. We have one day to go to the weekend. We're so
Yep,
close, Mary.
we
We're so
are. We're
close.
so
So
close.
we're gonna get there. We're gonna make it. We're gonna get there. So, everyone, thanks for joining us earlier tonight on our book club. Thanks again. To Dr. Terry Alford. This is going to drop a few days later, but we have right in the high of that. That was a great meeting today, and we have finished up by talking about these resolutions. So we will see you down the road. Mary, we will talk to you soon, guys. Have a great weekend. We will see you on the other side.
See you guys later.
Peace out.
See you guys later.